Ever feel like you can get English, but speaking it is a whole other thing? Like you can binge those Netflix shows, no problem, or ace a reading test, but then when you got to talk,
Yeah, I get that.
poof, brain's blank, like you're stuck.
It's a real thing.
Well, you are definitely not alone. And that's exactly why we're diving deep today into breaking the silence.
This guide's fantastic, by the way.
It is 12 techniques in here
12. To help you transform.
from, someone who understands to a confident English speaker.
That's the dream.
It is. We're going to be talking about shadowing, almost like you're like a voice actor, turning your home into like an English zone, even using tech to help you practice.
I love it.
So are you ready to unlock that fluent voice? I know it's in there.
Oh, it's in there somewhere.
Let's dive in.
One thing that really struck me about this guide is how it, really gets that frustration.
Yeah.
For so many people, it's not just about, memorizing vocab or grammar rules.
Yeah.
It's about making that jump
The leap. Yeah.
from, passive understanding to actually speaking.
Being able to do it.
Right. And they start with something that might surprise you. Active listening.
Okay, I got to admit, when I first saw that in the guide, I was like, wait, don't I already do that? But then it digs deeper, right?
It does.
It's not just hearing the words. It's more about becoming like an English detective.
Exactly. Taking notes on those phrases that trip you up.
Yeah.
Asking yourself questions like you're actually in the conversation
Yeah.
You're studying the structure of spoken English. How do native speakers use emphasis on certain words?
Oh, it's interesting.
And you're basically training your brain to use those patterns when you speak yourself.
So you're not just translating from your own language.
Right.
You're thinking in English.
You got it.
Which is super cool. And hey, if you're already finding this deep dive helpful, do us a favor, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes.
Yes, please. We love the support.
Now, one big myth the guide totally busts is this idea that you have to wait till you're ready to speak.
Right. There's this magical moment where suddenly you'll be perfect.
Yeah, exactly. Instead, they're all about speaking from day one.
Dive right in.
Jump in.
Which is a little scary.
It is a little scary.
But they have a technique for this called shadowing.
Ooh.
Okay, imagine, you're a voice actor repeating what you hear in a podcast, maybe, or an audio clip, almost at the same time.
So mimicking, basically.
Mimicking, yeah. It might feel a little silly at first, but, studies show that even just imitating sounds, it actually, wakes up those language centers in your brain.
Wow, that's fascinating.
And it starts to build muscle memory.
So you're literally training your mouth
Yeah,
to make those English sounds,
exactly.
which makes a lot of sense.
Right.
They also talk about reading aloud and recording yourself. Is that more about getting comfortable, getting more confidence?
It's partly that, yeah. But it's also about that feedback loop.
Oh, okay.
When you hear your own voice.
You can pinpoint stuff.
You start to pick up those little things where maybe your pronunciation or the way your voice goes up and down,
Intonation.
yes, is a little different than
Yeah.
a native speaker. So it gives you those concrete things to focus on.
Okay, so let's talk about vocabulary for a second.
Okay.
I think we've all been there where you know the word, but then you try to use it.
And it's gone.
Gone. How does this guide tackle that?
Well, they really emphasize the difference between passive vocabulary and active vocabulary.
Ooh, what's the difference?
So recognizing a word, that's step one, right?
Mhm.
But being able to use it without even thinking.
Like it just rolls off the tongue.
Exactly. That requires a different approach. So one suggestion they have is making themed lists.
Themed lists. Yeah.
So instead of just random words,
Okay.
you're learning vocab that's connected to your interests or your goals.
So if you're planning a trip?
Perfect example. You'd focus on phrases about travel, like ordering food, asking for directions.
So much more practical
Right.
than just some random list.
Exactly.
I like that. And they also say to actually build sentences with new words.
Or even mini stories.
Mini stories. Oh my
It
favorite.
forces you to really think about how the word works.
In different situations.
Yeah, the little subtleties, the different shades of meaning.
Yeah.
And it's about moving that word from your passive vocab to your active, ready-to-go toolkit.
So you're not just memorizing the dictionary definition, you're understanding how to actually use it
That's the key.
in a real conversation. That's huge.
Yeah.
But what about that feeling when, you have the words, you've learned them, but you're just too scared to use them,
Yeah.
the fear of messing up.
Oh, the fear of making mistakes. That's universal.
It is.
But the guide, like, tackles it head on. They encourage you to, like, shift your perspective. Instead of thinking of mistakes as failures,
Yeah.
think of them as, like, valuable feedback. Every time you make a mistake, it's a chance to learn.
It's like that saying, you don't learn to walk by following the rules. You learn by falling and getting back up.
Yes.
Same with language. And speaking of getting back up and trying again, the guide is big on finding a speaking partner,
Huge. Absolutely crucial.
whether it's through like a language exchange or a conversation club or even something online.
Whatever those. Interacting with other speakers, it's so important because it pushes you. You have to think on your feet. You have to adapt. You have to get comfortable with, real-time communication.
It's like taking all those words and those grammar rules out of the textbook and actually using them,
Right.
which, speaking of, is exactly what this deep dive is all about. So if this is resonating with you, hit that subscribe button and tell your friends.
Spread the word.
Now, let's talk about bringing English into your everyday life with the power of immersion.
This is where it gets exciting. So they talk about things like changing your phone settings to English or even labeling things around your house. It might seem small, but it's about creating this constant exposure.
That's not overwhelming.
Right. Low pressure. Just kind of soaking it in. Like you're turning your everyday life into this little language learning adventure. And, the guide takes this idea of immersion even further.
Oh, yeah?
They suggest thinking in English throughout the day.
Wait, hold on. Thinking in English, I get, like, changing my phone settings. But how do you actually do that? Like, train your brain to think in a different language.
It sounds a little intimidating, I know, but it's about starting small. Instead of translating everything in your head, try, narrating your actions in English.
Narrating, okay.
So, for example, while you're making breakfast in the morning, think to yourself, I'm pouring the coffee or I'm toasting the bread. It's about shifting that inner voice to English.
So it's like you're building that habit of thinking in English instead of going back and forth between languages.
Exactly.
I could see how that would help make speaking feel more natural over time, for sure. And speaking of feeling natural, the guide also talks about easing into real-world speaking with some, comfortable practice before.
Yes. Before you jump into those high-pressure conversations, you got to build that confidence in safe spaces.
Right.
So they suggest things like practicing in front of the mirror, maybe chatting with, supportive friends or family members.
Your biggest fans.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or even role-playing different scenarios.
Oh, role-playing. I love that idea. Imagine practicing ordering food at a restaurant or asking for directions, all from the comfort of your own home.
It's like a dress rehearsal for real life.
Exactly. And, you can even take this a step further with the help of technology. Remember how we talked about using your virtual assistant for practice?
Oh, yeah.
Well, the guide really highlights those pronunciation apps and that speech recognition software.
Those are great tools.
You mean like those apps that listen to you talk and tell you how you're doing?
Yep.
I've seen those advertised, and I always wondered if they actually work.
They can be super helpful. Think of it like having a digital pronunciation coach right there in your pocket. You can practice specific sounds, get instant feedback on your intonation, and even record yourself to see how you're improving.
Wow, so you're not just guessing if you're saying things right. You're getting specific feedback.
Exactly. Targeted areas to focus on.
That's pretty awesome.
Ah.
And if you're loving these tech tips, hit that like button and tell a friend about this deep dive. Okay, but technology is just one part of it, right? The guide also talks a lot about setting goals.
Goals are crucial, absolutely. Without clear goals, it's easy to feel lost or get overwhelmed.
Yeah, you're just kind of floating around.
Exactly. So the guide suggests things like committing to a certain amount of daily speaking practice, or maybe aiming to learn a set number of new phrases each week, or even keeping track of your progress in a journal. It's about breaking down that big, scary goal of fluent English into smaller, more manageable steps.
I love that. So instead of feeling like you have to climb Mount Everest all at once, you're focusing on reaching base camp one step at a time.
Perfect analogy. It's about making progress feel achievable and not overwhelming.
Right. And speaking of achievable progress, how does the guide suggest learning from those who have already, so to speak, climbed that mountain? Native English speakers.
Ah, yes. This is where it gets really interesting. The guide goes beyond just saying, talk to native speakers. They encourage you to become like an active observer. Watch interviews or vlogs. Pay attention to how native speakers use intonation and stress. You could even try to imitate different accents. Not to, sound like someone else.
Oh, right, yeah.
But to understand those subtle differences in how English is spoken.
So it's like you're really studying the language.
Exactly. You're not just passively absorbing it.
I remember when I first started watching English movies, I was so focused on understanding the words that I completely missed all those other things. The rhythm, the pauses, how native speakers connect words in a sentence.
It's about tuning in to the music of the language, going beyond the textbook. And, this doesn't have to be a formal study session. You can do this kind of observation anywhere. Pay attention to how people speak in cafes, on the bus, at the store. It's like a free language lesson happening all around you.
I love that idea, turning the world into your English classroom. And speaking of expanding your horizons, the guide also suggests attending English-speaking events.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Webinars, workshops, local meetups, even volunteering opportunities.
There's so much out there.
There is. These are all amazing ways to immerse yourself in the language and the culture.
Imagine attending a webinar on a topic you're passionate about or volunteering at an international event.
Oh,
Not only are you practicing your English, but you're connecting with people who share your interests.
it's a win-win.
Totally.
Yeah.
And sometimes the most unexpected situations can turn into learning opportunities.
Right.
Think about it, striking up a conversation with someone on the train, asking for recommendations at a bookstore, or even just chatting with your English-speaking neighbor. It's all practice.
Exactly. Every interaction is a potential language lesson.
That's so true. It's not just about those formal study sections. But
No.
even with the best intentions, there will be days when you feel frustrated or discouraged. How does the guide address those inevitable bumps in the road?
Well, it kind of brings us back to that idea of, like, the journey.
Yeah.
It reminds us that it's not a race.
Ah, right.
It's about celebrating those little wins, staying consistent with your practice, and remembering why you started learning English in the first place.
It's easy to lose sight of that sometimes.
It really is. It's like any skill, right?
Yeah.
There are days when you're, like, killing it, and then there are days when you feel like you're back to square one. But the key is just to keep going.
Don't give up.
Exactly. Keep in mind, progress isn't always this, like, straight line.
It's more like a winding path.
More like a jungle gym.
Jungle gym. Yeah, I like that. So we've covered a lot in this deep dive.
We have.
What are some of the key takeaways for our listeners?
Let's recap. So we started by talking about active listening, right? Really engaging with the material, taking notes, asking yourself questions, thinking about how native speakers actually structure their sentences. It's all about training your brain to think in English, not just translate.
Right, yeah. And we talked about that myth of waiting till you feel ready to speak.
Oh, yeah.
This guide is all about speaking from the get-go.
Day one.
Day one, yeah. Even if it feels a little awkward or you make mistakes. And we had some techniques for that, right? Like shadowing, reading aloud, recording yourself.
Oh, those good things.
All those good things to kind of build that confidence and get comfortable with the sounds.
Right. And then we talk about building that vocabulary that you can actually use.
Valuable vocabulary. Yeah.
Not just memorizing random words, but finding the words that connect to your life, your interests, your goals.
So practical.
And then, most importantly, actually using them. Building sentences, telling stories, make them your own.
And of course, we addressed that elephant in the room. The fear of making mistakes.
Oh, yeah. We all have it.
But we talk about how those mistakes, they're not failures.
Nope.
They're just feedback. They help you learn and get better.
Every mistake is a little lesson.
And finding a speaking partner, that was another biggie.
So important. Whether it's a language exchange or like a conversation club or even online, getting that real-time interaction is key.
Because you have to think on your feet. You have to adapt.
Yeah.
You can't just hide behind a textbook.
Exactly. Then we talked about the magic of immersion.
Oh, yeah, that was fun.
Creating that environment where you're just surrounded by English, changing your phone settings, thinking in English throughout the day, labeling stuff in your house,
Low pressure exposure.
just kind of soaking it up. And we talked about easing into that real world speaking with some low stress practice.
Yeah, like talking to yourself in the mirror.
Yeah.
Which sounds silly, but
It helps. Role playing, talking to friends, family.
your cheer squad.
Exactly. And technology, of course.
Oh, our tech tips. Those were good.
Pronunciation apps, that speech recognition software,
Yeah.
even just talking to your virtual assistant.
It all adds up.
It all helps. And then remembering to set those goals.
Yeah, the goals are important.
They keep you motivated. And not just any goals, specific goals, goals you can actually achieve.
Bite-sized goals.
Exactly. And remember, we talked about learning from the pros.
The native speakers.
Watch how they use the language, pay attention to their rhythm, their intonation, their stress.
It's like you're unlocking the secrets of the language.
Exactly. And lastly, remember that patience and persistence are your best friends on this journey.
Oh, for sure.
Language learning, it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Celebrate those wins, no matter how small.
Exactly. Keep practicing, stay consistent, and never lose sight of your why.
I love that.
Yeah.
Now, as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a little something to think about.
A challenge.
The guide mentions a few extra tips that we didn't have time to get into today, like singing along to English music, telling stories in English, even joining online forums to practice your writing.
Lots of fun ways to practice.
So we want to ask you, which one of those sparks your curiosity? What will you try today to break that silence and find your English voice?
Because remember, every step you take, no matter how small, it brings you closer to fluency.
And hey, if you enjoyed this deep dive and found these insights helpful, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more language learning tips and tricks.
We'd love to have you along for the ride.
Until next time, keep learning, keep speaking, and keep exploring the amazing world of English.
See you next time.